All right, well, all right. Hi, my name is Matt Sedillo, and I have today have the pleasure and honor of interviewing Howie Hawkins and Angela Walker. This is very, very exciting for me. So today, I guess the topic we're supposed to talk about is workers, COVID, and the Treaty of Guadalupe. But what I'm really interested in talking about, just to kind of set the context for some of the questions I'm going to be asking you, is that when we look at the statistics, I'm going to throw some statistics at you. In 2008, 66% of Latino the housing wealth in the Latino community was lost. At 54 cents on the dollar, the Latina is the lowest paid worker in America. Recently, there was a COVID outbreak in the meatpacking industry. Latinos make up 18% of the country, and yet made up 56% of the meatpackers that caught COVID. Again, we see all these different things that affect working class people, but amongst the proletariat, amongst the workers, the Latinos are the lowest paid, and in many ways, the kind of the backbone of the American economy. At the same time, these issues are very under discussed, very under kind of swept under the rug, not really brought to the forefront of attention. So it becomes this kind of thing where it's kind of it's kind of the capitalists talk about an invisible hand that moves the market, but this is kind of the invisible back that moves the economy. So how will the Green Party not only address these issues specific, but like what kind of policies would you put in place to try and combat these issues, but also bring these issues to the forefront?
Well, I would start by saying, we have policies. There's solutions to these problems, but we don't get them from the two capitalist parties. So really, the first thing is we got to build a mass party of working people where we organize people in their own communities and their own workplaces to act and speak on their own behalf. That's where our power is. And then the policies are obvious. We need to expand public housing to the point where everybody has an affordable option. As part of our Green New Deal, we're calling for 25 million new units of public housing over the next decade, because that's what's required to give low-income people an affordable option and also create public housing that's not segregated by class and race. So like in Europe, it's mixed income. It's professionals, middle-income working people, as well as low-income people. And in wages, we obviously need a better floor on our wage levels. We're calling for a $20 minimum wage, and that would be as part of our job guarantee. So if you can't get a job in a private sector that pays a living wage, you can go to the employment office instead of the unemployment office, say, I want my job. And those jobs have been designed by local communities to provide services and work on infrastructure and public works that the community needs. It's like the Works Progress Administration during the original New Deal, but it's scaled up to the point where everybody who's willing and able to work can have a job. And then COVID, OSHA's been gutted, and there should be standards, particularly in this COVID epidemic, where companies are required to provide the personal protective equipment, the social distancing, the sanitation, and all those measures so people can work safely. And behind that, we need to suppress community spread of the virus. That means a scaled up testing, contact tracing, and isolation program for those affected or exposed and infected so that we can suppress community spread. And the two governing parties in this country have totally failed to do that. Obviously, Trump had no idea what he's doing. He's a dummy. He's a loser. He's typhoid Mary of this COVID pandemic. And now the chickens have come home to roost because he got all his own people infected. This guy is really dumb. But, we're mad at Biden, too, because he's had the national platform. He could have convened socially distanced news conferences like Andrew Cuomo here in New York did and pounded away. We need a test, trace, and isolate program. We need to stop destroying the Postal Service. We need that $600 supplement on unemployment. We got to take care of the people losing their homes. We need to support state and local governments that are going broke. And he wants to be, the alternative leader, but he hasn't provided the leadership when he had the opportunity. So if you have the capacity to do something and you don't, you're complicit. So that's why we say the two governing parties are presiding over a failed state. So I'm sure Angela has more to say about that, but that's for starters.
And, you know, we were talking a little bit before we started, but we're really honored that, you know, honored to be having this discussion with you. So we thank you for the invite. Just thinking about what you were saying about the fact that this is underreported and it is something that is swept under the rug. We have to be in a place as a country where we stop treating people like they're expendable. And, you know, Latinx workers being, you know, I was aware of those, you know, the statistics you were talking about. And the fact that, you know, when we're hyping up, you know, with all this hyping up of essential workers, people need to be aware of who these essential workers are. And the people that, you know, the immigrants that you've been demonizing are the people who are making sure that you're still able to have food on your plates through a pandemic with absolutely no protections. I think we need to be very loud about that. I think we need to be very, you know, pull no punches about it. And also, you know, connecting that to the way that capitalism says that it's okay to exploit people. And, you know, when they get infected, it's whatever. No, these are members of our communities. They are valuable members of our communities. They're members of our families. And as a country, to stand by and watch this happen to people and not say anything, it's egregious.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you both. So we do see that, you know, you mentioned both parties. You know, with the Trump campaign, when we're talking about this particularly, you know, this kind of these populations, we see grave insult to, you know, Mexico, referring to everyone, you know, characterizing as sending drug dealers and rapists, the insult against El Salvador, you know, referring to it as a shithole, talking about, you know, characterizing as Salvadoran immigrants as all MS-13 gang members and bad hombres, very, you know, very horrible treatment of Puerto Rico, throwing, you know, things of them. But with Biden, we see a large, like, kind of ignoring, and then at times, when he did speak out, really kind of more of an interest in kind of Miami style politics, and he brought on Ana Navarro to kind of be his, like, you know, consul. So, like, we really see in Biden running a very middle of the road Republican campaign. So how do we how does the Green Party view these populations and some of these concerns? Like, for instance, I mean, the most pressing right now probably be you know, family separation and child detention.
You want to start, Angela?
Sure. Well, we favor open borders first off, because migration is a human right. It's something that people do, and it's something people have always done, and folks should not be demonized for it. We also favor, well, not favor, the Hawkins-Walker administration would immediately close those camps that migrants are being detained in, make family reunification a priority wherever it was possible, make sure that people who are infected with COVID, which we saw, you know, in really high numbers, making sure that people were receiving the treatment that they needed and able to be, you know, resettled. And like I said, reunited with their families wherever that was possible. I think that we need to, you know, when we're talking about Puerto Rico, you know, it is the right of Puerto Ricans themselves to decide what their sovereignty looks like, and you know, whether they want citizenship or whether they want sovereignty. That's entirely up to the people of Puerto Rico. But we do need to make sure that they are not, you know, that the island is not, we're not continuing to take from them without representing them. I mean, you want a clear case of taxation without representation, there it is. And so, and just thinking about the demonization of, you know, folks, Latinx folks from the Caribbean, Latinx folks from, you know, Central and South America, It's unacceptable. Again, it's unacceptable. I mean, and I'm just going to speak plainly. I'm going to hold this against El Chapo for the rest of my life, that he didn't keep his promise. And I probably shouldn't have said that publicly, but oh well. I'm in it. And I'll tell it. Anyway, stop it. Like I said, the demonization of people, you know, because they're Latinx is unacceptable. And coming from the top, you know, coming from the highest echelons of this government, it sets an awful tone. And we've seen that. We've seen people being attacked. We've seen people, you know, hollering out ugly things at rallies. And this is goaded on by, you know, someone who's supposed to be the quote unquote leader of the free world. So we need clean house. Mr. President, it's on you.
Well, I would add to that that everybody here should have documents so that they are able to access services and not be harassed for not having documents and threatened with deportation. And having second-class residence is used against all working people, because those without documents have a hard time organizing and defending themselves. And then they lower those wages, and then they're used against the rest of us by saying, you can't demand anything because we got these other people over here that they can't even defend themselves. So I think that's something that has to be part of the program. As far as Biden, I mean, we know what Trump is. He's a stone cold racist. He scapegoats, turns people's heads from, like he talks about, as if, you know, Mexican immigrants are taking our factories overseas. They didn't do that. Corporations did that. So he just, you know, confusing things. The problem with Biden is he panders to special interests. Like take the sugarcane field burning west of Miami. When the wind is blowing west, they call it black snow. It falls on Latino and Black communities, and people have serious health problems. When the wind is blowing east toward Miami and Mar-a-Lago, they can't burn on the fields. So there's a double standard right there. And the sugarcane industry's got its teeth into the Democrats as much as the Republicans. And I think Biden's lack of a real program on these issues is partly because he's pandering the interest, as well as the conservative exiles from countries like Cuba and Venezuela, who are a voting bloc in Florida. And he's not concerned with what's right. He's concerned about how he can get those votes. So he's not a reliable ally on these issues. And to me, it comes back to we need a party, a mass party that's organizing in all the communities, particularly the most oppressed communities. I mean, the future of the Green Party or an independent left are the 100 million people that didn't vote in 2016. Disproportionately working class, disproportionately people of color, disproportionately young. And we got to learn how to go out and organize local branches of a left party, the Green Party, whatever it is in the state, in those communities so that people can act and speak for themselves instead of, I call political ventriloquism. Too many progressives try to get the corporate Democrats to say and do what they want. And they're trying to be ventriloquists, but it doesn't work.
Yeah. So, you know, in your party platform, you mentioned honoring the Treaty of Guadalupe, and that really kind of threw me for a loop because I don't think I've ever seen anybody, including in the Green Party, you know, running for president, talking about honoring the Treaty of Guadalupe. That seems kind of it was kind of a for me. I mean, obviously for me and you know my background and things that you know I take study and interest in. You know, that was huge for a lot of people. That's just kind of a from the vault type commentary. Can you talk a little bit about why you chose to make honoring the Treaty of Guadalupe part of your campaign?
Well, to me, it's part of honoring treaties with all indigenous nations. And of course, we have, you know, American Indian nations, Alaska Native Nation, Native Hawaiians, but Chicanos, they're descended from indigenous people, as well as some European immigrants and some enslaved African people. But they were here hundreds of years as a group before the Anglos got to the Southwest. And if we don't honor our treaties, which in the Constitution are equal to anything else, any other constitutional provision, how can we count on the government respecting our rights, say in the Bill of Rights and other provisions. So it's something that should interest everybody. And the land grants that were recognized by the Treaty of Guadalupe have been violated, just like a lot of these treaties with other indigenous nations have been violated. And I know they're still fighting in the courts in California, New Mexico, and other parts of the Southwest to try to get those land grants recognized. And to me, that's what a progressive, just federal government would do. Get these issues resolved and let people have access to the land that the treaties say they have access to.
Again. So you mentioned the Chicanos in the American Southwest. So I mean, for me, a lot of like when I watched the rise of Trump in 2015, 2016, I really could see a lot of elements of the politics of the American Southwest. Like this to me was just a retread of Prop 187, a retread of SB 1070. So that's California, Arizona. So to us, this is very familiar, but on a national scene, this was a little bit different. The idea of taking the Mexican border and as your central talking point as a way to become the president of the United States of America was different. That was not really necessarily that. Yet at the same time, the national discourse has lagged. You know what I'm saying? People when they talked even at the time when it was happening, people were not talking about it with a focus on learning this history that you're talking about, the history you just illustrated. And if people don't know that, this thing's gonna happen over and over and over again. People are gonna say, something like Mexico saying drug dealers and rapists, we gotta build a wall. People are cheering on at the rallies. They're saying that the high point is always build a wall. Who's gonna pay? Mexico will pay. Well, Mexico will pay is not actually a really serious proposal. That's like a psychic release, right? And that comes from that same history I'm talking about. It comes from that history of Remember the Alamo. That comes from that history of the Mexican-American War, which in many ways never really ended. So I guess my question to you is, how can you this question of the Chicanos, this questions of the Southwest, how can it be better brought to the American public as a whole to really understand and invest in understanding this particular history? Because I don't think it's there yet.
Wow, that's a big question because our public education system doesn't present this history. The narratives that Trump plays upon are already out there. And then in other parts of the country, people don't know the Southwest history, although there are a lot of Mexican immigrants throughout the country now, and they're, large group. And so scapegoating new immigrants is part of the right wing's game. It's a divide and conquer game. So it has to be countered everywhere. I think we got to fight for a public school curricula that include the history of everybody. This is a diverse, multicultural society, and all strands of that history should be included. And I know Angela got started in activism in high school, trying to get a Black history course in her high school. So maybe she wants to talk about, that from that perspective.
I was just thinking, because that is, like you said, Howie, that is a massive question. I think we are at a point, and I think this ties into where we stand with public education too, and the fact that curricula should be reflective of the communities that they serve. And, we need a complete revamping of the history that's taught in this country. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only person who in high school went through their history book with a red pen going, this is a lie, this is a lie, this is a lie. I know I'm not the only person that did that. If I am, I will. But we need to revamp, not only teach history, all the histories of all the cultures in this country, but teach it accurately. We got books that are saying, referring to enslaved people as workers. So that's not where we are. We have massive re-education that is needed. We have massive, and I think things that we can do now so that this isn't so mountainous, and I know that there are a lot of communities that are doing these knowledge shares, on like a community level, like maybe within local parties. I know that they were doing it, in my home city of Milwaukee. A lot of knowledge sharing, about different subjects was happening. So it doesn't have to be, us revamping the school system immediately. If we want to have these conversations, we can, find folks in our communities to do knowledge shares with. And especially in the age of, Zoom coming to the forefront because of COVID, we're able to reach more people than, we were before. So yeah, and it's just like Jazz too just said, a people's history, the Zen. Yeah, if I were teaching history, that's one of the books that I would use. And also Roxanne Ortiz, an Indigenous People's History, because we're not, our young people have no idea, and they need to. We can't go. I'm a firm believer. We can't go forward if we don't know where we've come from, and the history of this country has got to be taught accurately if we're going to heal as a country.
Well, I think just following this line, I think that the struggle to define reality, as well as the economic struggle, kind of dovetail neatly, because these history books, many of them produced in Texas, which just one the controversially recently saying that I forget what the exact word was. They were saying that enslaved Africans were actually involuntary workers, or some really just inflammatory nonsense. But these are all produced by like three or four academic publishers. I mean, or scholastic, or I don't know what the correct word is, but like 3 or 4 publishers make the textbook. So they're mostly in use. So I mean, again, this is like the high concentrations, a cartel of information, a cartel of propaganda to teach our kids. So I mean, like that, I guess that would have to be. Well, I mean, how would you address? I guess that would, yeah. How would you address that? And how would you address the concentration of power and the information?
Well, unfortunately, we've been so busy, 47 primaries to get the nomination, and fighting to get on the ballot, and then a few weeks to campaign. There's a lot of policy that we would like to have written up, and one of them is media reform. And by media, I mean there's about 5 or 6 conglomerates that have most of the TV and radio broadcasts, the cables, the newspapers, the radio and TV stations. And as a result of the 1994 Telecommunications Act, which had, before then, there were limits on cross ownership and monopolization of local media markets. I mean, I just sent a letter to the Federal Communications Commission because Rush Limbaugh had a 2-hour radio rally for Trump. And there's still an equal time provision in the 1934 Communications Act. And we actually have a lawyer that was a general counsel for the FCC write our complaint up. And so I'm demanding equal time on Rush Limbaugh. We'll see if we get it, but maybe the FCC will sanction him for such partisan, use of, the vast network he has. And in my city of Syracuse, the only commercial talk radio station is 24/7 right-wing talk radio, including Rush Limbaugh. So people tune into that who are not, right-wingers like Limbaugh, because it also has local sports, news about what's going on in the schools, closings when there's snow. So a lot of people listen to that who are not right-wingers. And so if I get equal time, I'll be talking to some people that might vote for us. So we've got to have, we got to restore the antitrust provisions that created a more diverse media landscape. We got to have proactive policies so that Black and Latino groups can have radio stations where they can put their point of view across. I remember coming up in the San Francisco Bay Area, there was 2 Black-owned radio stations, K-Soul down in East Palo Alto and KDIA in Oakland. They're not there anymore. They're part of these conglomerates. I forget what, I went back and tried to listen to KDIA, a couple decades later. I forget what it was, but it sure wasn't, a Black oriented station. And then we got print journalism. The business model doesn't work because advertising's gone to social media. So we should subsidize real investigative journalism at the local level like when the country started, we subsidized postal rates for newspapers and pamphlets so the voting public could be educated. So that could involve boards that get money from the federal government that are elected by lot, like juries, and then they allocate grants to investigative reporters to do their work and get it published. And then some of these social media platforms, they're natural monopolies, because once they get to a critical mass where they have a lot of people and all the information's there, everybody wants to be there. On Amazon, on Facebook, Google searches. Maybe they should be public enterprises that operate at cost for public benefit instead of private profit-oriented organizations. So I think there's a whole realm there of media reform that unfortunately has never been raised in this whole presidential campaign, which I have to say is the most issueless, vacuous campaign I've ever heard. It's all about Trump. He tweets, the Democrats react and say, how horrible. And Biden is not Trump. Vote for Trump. That's about as deep as it gets. And we got life and death issues, climate, inequality, nuclear arms race, COVID, police brutality, and police murders. I mean, very little discussion of real issues. And that is partly the media environment. What we got is a two-party corporate state. And then we got corporate media that is corporate state media that are basically stenographers for those two corporate parties. So it makes it difficult to get a word in edgewise. I've had a total of 3 minutes on all the TV networks and cable networks. And it was a setup to say, yeah, maybe what I'm saying has a lot of support, but you can't vote for Hawkins this year because we got to get rid of Trump, vote for Biden. And they did that after they took me off camera and spent a couple minutes refuting what I said. So, yeah, media reform has got to be part of the picture.
Yeah. Makes it impossible to talk about the real issues. So getting to one of these real issues, I want to kind of trip back to a little bit what we were talking about before. I meant to bring it up, but I kind of got lost in the conversation myself. Many of these prisons that are housing undocumented migrants are privately held by the GEO Group and various other groups. What would you do about these private prisons?
Closing private prisons is an absolute necessity. We understand that, they are a major contributor to what we understand and major beneficiaries of mass incarceration. When you're, getting paid per amount of people that you're incarcerating, then it behooves you to keep those jails full. And things that which we saw in Wisconsin a few years ago, things that, there's bills where they try to slide really horrible legislation under people's noses. There was a bill in Wisconsin that would have made, a whole lot of misdemeanors, upgraded them to felonies. And so now you've got people branded as felons, you've got them, being pushed into the prison system. And then, how this works becomes a revolving door for some folks. But all the while, the people in power over these things are making money. And, not to mention how many private industries, which I think was really highlighted out west during these wildfires, where incarcerated people were used as firefighters, but not allowed to be firefighters upon release. A whole lot of people are getting hip to the fact that a lot of private industries are using the work and the labor of incarcerated people without, providing a living wage, without providing proper medical care, without, making sure that people are, upon release, have some sort of a nest egg to go and do something different with their life with, to build on. It's something that was also highlighted by, Ava DuVernay's, documentary 13th. We need to close that loophole in the 13th Amendment that allows people to be used as slave labor. And it is not an overstatement to say that. It is slave labor if you are incarcerated. We need to close that loophole. And so, and it's not just private prisons, it's also, the facilities that ICE is running. We need to close these things. There's no reason to do this to people. And it is exploitation at its highest. And, we know this is what capitalism does and how it works. And so, these things are unacceptable.
Yeah. Well, I want to say, even moving even away from just the private prisons, the federal and state prisons that are publicly funded, there's many private corporations that actually, take advantage of the low prison wages. I mean, what is to be done about that?
Well, that's like charter schools. They're nominally funded by the public, and the charter school itself may be a nonprofit corporation, but they take that public money and give it to their for-profit friends, who are often the same people. It's a big scam. Same thing happens when we privatize services that are supposed to be provided to prisoners. So they cut costs to pump up profits, and the prisoners get neglected. And then, what Angela mentioned is having for-profit corporations produce things, particularly for the public markets, the general markets, in competition with other companies that don't have access to workers that are paid pennies an hour in some cases. That is enslaving people. So just because they're public doesn't mean they aren't channeling that money to for-profit entities. And that's why even the public prisons are like hotels for private prisons. You want to fill them, and you want to cut your costs to make more profits. And so that whole system has to be revamped. Yeah. There are some people that are dangerous and need to be in prison, but they should not be exploited. There should be a path for them to, rehabilitate themselves and come out and be constructive citizens. But you can't do it when the prison system becomes what they call the prison industrial complex, a profit center.
Throughout this conversation, we've touched on ICE. What is your official position on that entity?
ICE and Border Patrol should be dismantled. I mean, that Facebook page that Border Patrol had, and half of their 20,000 agents were on it, filled with racist and misogynistic invective. And then you see the people that volunteered to go like into Portland on behalf of Trump and snatch people off the streets, not with clear identification of even who the hell they were. And the people that got snatched weren't told who they were. And then when they did get out, they weren't even given an arrest record, or they had no idea what had happened to them. They acted like secret police. This is not, the kind of law enforcement we should have. So we need to dismantle them and then have another agency to administer a humane immigration policy. As Angela said, we want an open borders policy where when you get to the border, you check in. There's no warrant for your arrest. You go about your business, whether it's shopping or work or vacation or residence. And so we need a new agency to administer that. And maybe some of these ICE and Border Patrol agents are good people and could be part of that agency, but they'd have to come back and be vetted very carefully, given the history of ICE and Border Patrol. And I live within 100 miles of the Canadian border. And I'll tell you, it's not just down in the Southwest. Border Patrol goes around asking people for their papers, particularly at like the Regional Transportation Center where the trains and the buses converge in Syracuse. And if you're Black or brown, they'll ask you for your papers. Now, most people don't know they don't have to show them, but they're looking for people to snatch. They snatch people right off the streets. And, what kind of free society are we when, police you don't even know, or your local police, ask you for your papers? People should be free to walk around, and if there's something somebody did wrong, get a warrant and go arrest them. But don't just be going around randomly picking people. But it's not random. You know, they pick black people because they might be Jamaican or some other West Indian community, or if they're brown from Latin America. And that's just not right. And it should be something that everybody that talks about freedom should be concerned about.
Okay. You also mentioned when talking about some of the activities going on right now in the prisons by charter schools, and my mother actually attended a school called Wilson High, which is kind of famous in these parts because it was one of the first. It was the first high school to walk out in East LA walkouts. But today, Wilson High is home to a charter school within the school. I mean, there's a school, and then inside the school, there's a smaller charter thing that's actually getting public. So what would you do? Which is really outrageous because it's not even like a separate entity. I mean, the charter school is profiting from the electric bill, toilet paper, water bill. I mean, all kinds of the entire infrastructure, right? So what is the policy on charter schools?
We absolutely do not support school privatization. And what you're talking about is co-location, what they call co-location. Mm-hmm. And it's something we fought in Milwaukee and we didn't win. We have the same situation. It's a very parasitic arrangement where you have this, and I'm not overstating, it's parasitic because just like you said, they're benefiting from the resources that are in that building already without necessarily bringing anything into it. And they pick and choose which buildings that they're going to do. The ones in Milwaukee, are these really well kept, really historic, some of them, school buildings that, they're doing this with. And, it's parasitic. They're eating the host inside out. Eventually you're going to need more room. Where do the public school kids go? So yeah, we are not supporters of privatizing public schools. I believe, and Howie believes firmly in fully funding public schools, because what people don't realize when charter schools come in selling their snake oil to communities, they pick and choose which communities that they're going to do that to. And it's y'all's community and it's our community. And where parents are so busy working to put food on the table, they want to hear that they're getting like the best option for their children. And what happens is that's not the case. And we see it. We see push out where, private charter schools, and where I'm from, voucher, which is the religious arm of school privatization. They can decide whether, your child didn't wear a belt that day. Those are demerits, and enough demerits, they push a child out of that school. But the money from the state that followed your child into that school is retained by that school. And so this young person is pushed back to public schools who are underperforming by design. And I think that's what a whole lot of people, when they're talking about, but innovation, but possible, no. Public schools are very capable of doing everything that they need to do if you simply fund them. And so we are firmly against the privatization of public schools. And we are also big supporters of the community school model, where schools reflect their communities, provide wraparound services to those communities. So it's not just for the young people that attend, but families, caregivers, whomever is in that community that needs things can go into the school and get them. And so, yeah, I have a whole lot of really nasty invectives I use when I'm talking about privatizers, but I'm going to be good.
Yeah, I would add that, our policy as the federal government should stop mandating high stakes testing, which is the wedge for privatization, because the tests reflect the communities the students come from. And so they define low income minority students. They get lower test scores. They define the schools as failing and use that to justify privatization. And then, as Angela pointed out, the students that are supposedly benefiting can get pushed out if they don't meet standards, or, in some of these charters, they push out the low performing students. So they're standardized test scores will look better, and push them back into the public schools, which have even less money than before. The other thing we want to do is federalize local school funding and get it off the property tax, which is unequally distributed between communities, and have the federal government provide a sufficient, generous per capita amount of money to every school, with some supplements for schools and communities that have suffered an educational deficit for a long time, to help them get to where they need to be. And then leave it to elected school boards. People in the community, the parents, the local teachers, they have a vested interest in doing good by their students. And I think we can trust that. Every time we see mayoral control or state control of public schools, we see privatization. And they justify it with those high stakes testing. And the outside interests, you know, this wasn't schools, but look at Flint, Michigan. You know, the state took over the management of Flint, switched the source of water, and everybody got poisoned by the new water. I mean, that's the analogy to what happens when some damn governor starts trying to run local schools. It's not about the students. It's about the private interests that want privatization.
You know, it's interesting though. You mentioned the scheme to have a federally funded public school system. There's actually I believe it was in early 70s. Let me get the exact date here. In 72, there was a case called Rodriguez versus Antonio, and that was actually an attempt to get to get a federally funded school system, right? In California, there was Serrano versus Priest, which was to get like a statewide school system, which actually won, but in the state of California, but they just didn't implement it. So like unimplemented. But Rodriguez versus Antonio was went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they argued exactly that. And I think one of the Supreme Court justices said that education was not a constitutional right. So I mean, this is kind of, you know, this is what we're up against, and we have been up against for a long time. And you know, and I don't think, like, you know, for some people they'll ask like people talk about like working class solutions, and then they say like, well, that's kind of an ethnic struggle when you working class solutions. Well, you know, the families that brought forth Rodriguez versus Antonio were working class. You know, they just so happen to be a bunch of Mexicans, right? But they were working class, and their struggle is in the interest of everyone's struggle, of everyone in the country. So I think that, you know, what you say today is really fantastic. I think people are really confused though, because when we talk about privatization, you know, people that propose privatization, they don't call it privatization. They tend to call it public-private partnership, which sounds really good to the American ear, right? Because people in this country are very, they're like, oh, you know, I don't want to go too far. The answer is somewhere in the middle, right? There's like, that's the kind of how they tend to be, right? So when they hear private public partnership, it sounds like a little bit of, you know, a little bit of small business can do, and a little bit of oversight. They don't realize what's really being said is that we're going to take public money, we're going to put it in private pockets.
Exactly. It's one of those, you know, what do they call them? Focus group tested slogans to confuse people as to what's really going on.
And then you think about the working class and poor communities that they're targeting. You know, these are parents and caregivers that want the best for their young people. And, you know, when when the other half that you're constantly hearing is how poor performing your school is. Your school is failing. We saw this in Milwaukee like ad nauseum. And I'm fairly sure they're still doing it. But this school is failing. And, you know, I'd have parents that I talk to that were like, you know, my kid's in a failing school. I said, let's be very clear. Your school is not failing. It has been failed because the federal government has fallen down on its job to provide. The state is not able to provide in the way that it needs to because, you know, it's gerrymandering and all these other things that come into it too. And also a lack of political will. Let's be real clear about that. You know, as long as it's brown kids and it's black kids primarily that you're experimenting on who's going to raise hell about it. So, you know, I think that people have to be, you know, nobody right now in this timeline needs one more thing on their plate. But like for Black and brown parents who might be watching or listening, just be aware of the language that these people use and do your research and follow that money.
Excellent. Earlier in this conversation, how you mentioned kind of the sugar, the way the sugar extraction, the way the wind blows, and so all throughout this country, we have food deserts and cancer alleys, and those are primarily, and we know who typically lives in those. So what's the policy on environmental justice?
Well, that's our Green New Deal.
In terms of like racially, what I mean, what I'm saying,
right?
Obviously, the Green Party, but
well, within the Green New Deal, we have a program to rebuild all our productive systems for clean energy, zero emissions, and zero waste, or as close as we can get to it. So that means materials used in production and in products are recycled. So we reduce extraction from the earth and waste disposal on the earth. And then within that, we want to make sure when we build Green New Deal factories that are clean, when we target cleanup of environmental hazards, that the money goes directly to the communities and bypasses the governors and the mayors that have neglected these communities for decades. So the money goes to people in those communities so they can take care of their own situation rather than being dependent on a power structure that has neglected them all along. So that is the way we build. When we talk about the best way to deal with white supremacy is black power and brown power. In other words, you don't beg the white people who got the power to do the right thing. You empower the people that are oppressed to take care of their own needs. And the way we want to deliver all the things the Green New Deal will do is make sure racially oppressed communities have the resources to look out after their own needs. And you mentioned food. I mean, we have an agricultural section of the Green New Deal. We want to transform the whole economy or the whole agricultural sector to organic methods, regenerative methods to rebuild the soil, which will bring carbon out of the atmosphere, get the corporate farming out, subsidize the transition to organics, provide parity pricing so all farm inputs are covered in the price of commodities so that farmers get their costs back, and then extend that organic agriculture into urban areas so that they become greener and people can produce food for their own needs or even for marketing, and have urban agriculture, which in many cities around the world is a very important contribution to the food supply. And we don't have that in this country, but there's certainly a lot of interest. The community gardens movement is very popular just because people like to garden. And if you don't have a backyard, community gardens is where people can have that experience and get, whatever they like to grow, collard greens, green beans, corn, whatever it is. And so I think all that has to be part of a program. And then the food deserts thing also, I live in a food desert. I got to drive 15 miles to the nearest grocery store out of central Syracuse. We have no grocery stores in Syracuse proper. Well, actually one over by an interstate. And we've tried to build these markets. The Socialist Party in Milwaukee back in the 1910s created municipal grocery stores. And in their case, it wasn't that there weren't other grocery stores, it's that they were gouging the working class on price. I mean, that's something we can do, elect local governments and have municipal food stores that are real groceries at a scale where, we tried to do a food co-op in my neighborhood, and we were nickel and dime by the state on grants and really didn't have enough capital. There was a little cost overrun in the construction, and we were in a buying right from the start. And it didn't survive, but we're not the only one. One of the supermarket chains, as soon as we opened, they opened up down the street, figuring, well, if they think they can make a go of it, we'll come in. They went out of business before we did. So I think, socialist solutions to this pressing problem is one way to get food into the food deserts.
So Joe Biden once said that he bragged that he had voted for a 700-mile border fence, which is different than a border wall, I suppose. Bill Clinton was Donald Trump has talked about building a wall, which I guess he's built some of it, and the wind keeps knocking it down. But Bill Clinton actually did build a wall on the California border that exists today. If you go to Tijuana, you can see it. It's pretty horrific. Hillary Clinton as well as Barack Obama were instrumental in the Honduran coup, which drove a lot of the population to migrate here, which has given us a lot of large component of the current Central American border crisis here in the migrant crisis right now. George W. Bush started ICE, but that rapidly exploded, not in his administration, but actually in the administration of Barack Obama, who was known as the Porter-in-Chief. He appointed Thomas Homan, who still is the overseer, the leader, the administrator of ICE. So clearly, this is a bipartisan thing. Joe Biden himself, people say Donald Trump's obviously a racist, but he's Joe Biden. But Joe Biden himself has told radio commentators if they don't vote for him, they ain't black. He recalled a bizarre story about possibly assaulting a teenager in a parking lot, who he referred to as corn pop. He has also once said, you can't go to a 7-Eleven without a slight Indian accent. So Joe Biden is also very, very racist. So I don't think it's really the mystification of Joe Biden. I think it's more the mystification of the Democratic Party as a whole. Why are people so mystified by this party when they act in many ways no differently than the Republican Party?
I would say Trump is off the charts with his racist invective. So next to him, Biden doesn't look so bad. The problem is the whole power structure has been racist from both parties. I mean, that's what got me into third-party politics back in the 1960s. Reagan was running around. I was raised in a Republican family. They told me we're the party of Lincoln. We're for civil rights. And Reagan's running around California leading a Republican effort to repeal the Rumford Fair housing law that had just passed. Yeah. And they succeeded in that election. But the Democrats had the choice between the Dixiecrats from Mississippi or the Freedom Democrats from Mississippi. And they chose the Dixiecrats. So I was asking, where's my party? And Johnson, the lesser evil, won and then escalated in Vietnam. And, I can give you a long list of things from as I entered adulthood being drafted for that damn war to when I left adulthood, my pension being cut because of a bipartisan bill in Congress that removed protections for earned benefits for multi-employer pensions. Yeah, Biden may be the lesser evil, but he's still evil as hell.
And I mean, just thinking of how he doesn't even try to hide it. And people are, trying to cover this. Oh, it's a gaffe. No, when people tell you who they are, you need to believe them. This cat has not started saying things like this in a vacuum. And that you ain't black comment, just I was going, I like it when my enemies show themselves. Just go and tell us what you really think. So, at the end of the day, it's like how he said, it's this power structure. This is a country that is built on genocide of indigenous people, the enslavement and exploitation of Africans, of indigenous people from Central America, Latin America, and South America. And when you build a house on a foundation that is rotten, the house is going to stink. And this house stinks.
Absolutely. So I just kind of feel like the entire way the duopoly operates is that it's kind of a game of good cop, bad cop. But I feel though, as you mentioned, people talk about Trump as like an existential threat, and in many ways, Trump is the racist invective is definitely an increase. It definitely did turn up the heat, at least in recent history. But like with that, like with the motion of the quote unquote greater evil, pulls the lesser evil along with it, right? So the lesser evil gets more and more evil. I mean, like Joe Biden is way more. It's like a full blown Dixiecrat, and this is now like the lesser evil is like this Dixiecrat. The lesser evil is this guy going around saying you ain't black and you have to have an Indian accent to walk into 7-Eleven, and believe it or not, I have like, I think he said something like, believe it or not, I have Jamaican friends or drive taxis, something like that. It was just like just these. I mean, there's a whole. I mean, I researched it. I mean, it was just really incredible, just the different things this guy said over the years. There's even like I think Washington Post put out like who said it, Biden or Trump, and you can't tell. It's just like I don't know. And so like it just seems like I guess maybe the difference is that like Donald Trump says it like pointing his finger like I hate you, whereas like Joe Biden's like, oh, isn't it funny, right? So like that kind of maybe that's the difference. I'm not really sure, but it just keeps moving in this direction, and if we don't stop, you know, like if the greater evil is the head of the train and the lesser evil is the caboose, and it's the same train, if we don't pull at the caboose, if we throw ourselves in the caboose and say, well, this isn't as bad as being in the front, you're still on the same train. You're still heading the same direction. And I think that, you know, a lot of people panic about you know the Green Party and panic about this concept of third party spoiler, but I don't think they really realize that this is going to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. This is going to get worse and worse and worse and worse until something stops it.
Well, and the whole idea of us being spoilers is missing the real reason why these losers like Donald Trump and George W. Bush got put in the presidency. It was the Electoral College. Green Party didn't do that. And before you even get to the Electoral College, what made it close was massive suppression of Black voters, Latino voters, student voters that are likely to be Democratic voters in states like Wisconsin and Texas because of photo ID requirements where the student ID doesn't count. And instead of fighting on those things, the Democrats want to scapegoat the Green Party, which doesn't solve the problem. Most of our voters wouldn't vote if we weren't on the ballot. The exit polls from 2016 showed that 61% of Stein voters, our presidential candidate, would not even have come out to vote if she wasn't on the ballot. So the Democrats are not only, you know, undermining their own real interests by not focusing on the real solutions, they're alienating progressives. When we get knocked off the ballot, say in Wisconsin, Angela got 67,000 votes, 20% of the vote running for sheriff in Milwaukee. She's a native daughter of Black Milwaukee. How do you think those people feel when they find out the Democrats knocked her off the ballot? Oh, we're going to vote for Biden. No, a lot of them are going to say, to hell with the whole thing. I ain't voting. The Democrat, it's a counterproductive strategy. It's authoritarian. I mean, people say, watch out for Trump's authoritarianism. Well, I'll tell you, for the Green Party people, we get it from the Democrats. Every time we try to run, they try to knock us off the ballot. You know, we complain about Putin knocking people off the ballot for signatures in the Moscow city elections. Where did he get that from? I think he got it from our country. Yeah. Just like Hitler got his racial theories and practices from our country. So the spoiler thing is really missing the problem, which is voter suppression that makes it close. The Republicans actually represent a small minority, or, you know, maybe 30% of the potential electorate at best. But they win because they suppress the vote, and, you know, with voter purges and photo ID and not putting working equipment in Black precincts and not enough polling places, so people like wait all day to vote, and all these games they play. And that's the thing the Democrats need to worry about, not us. We bring new voters out.
Yeah. I know we're pressed for time, but I just, you know, the Electoral College thing you brought up right now. In 2016, Trump loses the popular vote by 3 million votes. He loses California by 4 million, around 4 million, right? So the Electoral College essentially took the Californian vote and threw it in the trash. And that's what happened. And nobody's even cognizant of this. Nobody's even aware of this. And most people aren't even aware that of how the Electoral College, even though like it was a news story for a minute, no one wasn't really aware of the fact that if you live in, say, the state of California, you really shouldn't feel if you the need to vote for Biden, if you're like, oh, I don't want to do it, but I have to. Like, unless you think Trump's going to win California, there's really no need, no imperative to vote for the quote unquote lesser evil.
Biden's ahead by about 40 points in California.
Right. So
Name any progressive that votes for Joe Biden, who's against Medicare for all, against the Green New Deal, against ending the endless wars, doesn't know how to deal with the border, and so forth. You're giving him a stronger mandate to do the evil things he will do. You don't need to worry about Trump in California. Yet you're right. People don't understand the Electoral College. There's this whole narrative that a vote for the Greens is a vote for Trump, which, I mean, first grade logic. You got your pears, your pineapples, and your peaches, and you put them in different baskets. Well, a green vote goes in the green basket, not the Trump basket. I mean, Trump has scared a lot of people stupid. I mean, they're just not thinking straight.
Okay, well, I appreciate both of you so much for the time that you've given me. Final thoughts?
Well, we thank you for the time that you've given us and, meeting you. Because I know my homie does, like I said before we started, Dust James is like over the moon to know we were going to meet. So it really is an honor and a pleasure for us to be here. And the thing that's like right in the forefront of my mind is that November 3rd is going to be wild. I mean, it's going to be wild. So, folks who can work, as either poll workers or are able to be poll observers, which I was reminded last night that I can't. I should have known that, but yeah. So you would think, and it was like, no, I'm gonna do it. No, I can't do it. But if you are able to be a poll observer, poll watcher, they're gonna need you. They're gonna need the support. We don't know how these things are gonna shake out. And so just be mindful. And also, we're going into fall, going into winter. COVID has not left. Please stay safe. Keep doing whatever you've been doing to keep yourself safe, and don't let your guard down, because this thing hasn't. I read COVID ain't over just because we're over it. So please take care of yourselves.
Yeah, I would say, the polls have been consistent since the spring. Biden's going to win. Now it's a landslide. He's going from, consistently 4 or 5% ahead to 7 or 8% ahead. Now he's in double digits. And the battleground states have moved from the upper Midwest down to Republican strongholds like Georgia and Texas and Arizona. So the only way Trump could get back in is if the mail-in ballot is not counted. So besides being poll watchers to object to and document any funny business, we got to be prepared to be mobilized. We have a labor council up here in Rochester, New York, that just passed a resolution calling on the AFL-CIO to call a general strike if they try to stop the mail-in count. And that's the kind of thing we need to do. We need to be prepared to go out in the streets and make sure the votes are counted. Unlike Florida 2000, where Angela was one of those people on the street down there, and Gore and Lieberman said, get off the streets. We got this in the courts. And we know what happened. The Supreme Court gave it to Bush without counting the full count. So I think that's important. And then, a lot of people on the independent left are discouraged with this anybody but Trump environment. But Biden should win, and I expect the honeymoon to be short. The progressives are going to be disappointed very quickly, and then it'll be time for the Green Party and the independent left to step up and provide real solutions. And real solutions can't wait. The climate meltdown, the inequality that's a life or death issue for people day to day in this nuclear arms race and other really serious issues like COVID, real solutions can't wait. So we need to be ready. It doesn't stop on November 3rd.
Yeah. Well, that's a great note to close on. So I thank you so much again, both of you, for your time, and I really appreciate you. expanding on this question for you, Guadalupe, which was really what got me interested in your campaign in the first place. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate you putting that as part of your platform, and I appreciate everything else you said, which I'm in agreement with.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.